If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello, Internet. Yes, you got this face again. You didn't expect this one. And as Chris would always say, I'm very excited or I'm excited, but I'm terribly apprehensive as well because I'm prone to boo-boos and I don't want to boo-boo. Tonight we have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce you to Major Thomas van Dalen, and I'm getting that right. And if I'm not getting it right, correct me, please, sir. Senior or Staff Officer Ops Group 42 when he left the Defence Force in 1942, and his home, as he says himself, his home was in Soweto. So I do believe we're going to get some very, very interesting stories here. I'm going to say to you, sir, welcome here. We're looking forward to hearing your story. And we'd like you to start in the beginning of your career, run through us quickly. Just let us know where you were, and then you can specify. If you want to go further, if you want to tell us a bit about your childhood, the floor is yours, sir. Go for it.
Thank you, Fossey, and thank you that I can speak to you tonight about my career in the South African Defence Force. I grew up in a house where my father was in the military as well, and it was quite an attractive thing to see, and the discipline with which we grew up in the house. But anyway, so after school, I went to university to study theology for 2 years. And after 2 years, I realized this is not what I want to do. And decided to join the Defence Force. And one morning, I got up, I drove through to Army headquarters, and I joined the Army. And when the guy asked me at recruitment, asked me, which corps do I want to be, or which army, or which part do I want to be? I said, I want to be an infantryman. And he asked me, are you flipping crazy to join the infantry? I said, well, that's my dad said, that's the only place to be. And I joined the infantry. And that's where my career started. I started in Potchefstroom in 1982. And as a rifleman there, then I was transferred to the infantry school at the end of January 1982, where I started my leadership course, or my leaders course. But at that stage, they decided they're going to start off again with an old permanent force part 1 course, which is an 18-month course, which meant that we would go right through from February 1982 to almost June in 1993 at the infantry school, whereas the other guys got their ranks in December, early in December, and then they went to their various units. Okay, so I went through this whole thing, and we got our rank. I became a second lieutenant in December 1982, and in January came back to the infantry school, then where we did Coin Rural, and went up to the border to complete another 6 weeks there after the Coin Rural, and returned to the infantry school where we got the choice to either go to 1 Para Battalion to do a jump course there, or we could go to Dani Tronk School at that stage, where Dave Peddle recently joined the Army, and as a captain came back from North Island, where he was for I think 10 or 12 years, and he was the course leader with a certain staff sergeant Shepherd, also an Irishman, a real Irishman, and we did the coin insurgent, or the coin instructors course, urban instructors course. It was the first one presented in South Africa at that stage, and I qualified, and then I was transferred I asked for State President's Guard, but I was transferred to the other side of the country to South African Infantry Battalion Group in Walvis Bay, where I remained for a year, and then went to the military academy, got married after that, and was transferred to 3 South African Battalion in Potchefstroom, where I stayed for until 1988. During that time, I was on detached duty to the Army College as well for a year, where I presented the formative course for young officers. And I was earmarked to take the course to Heidelberg because they decided that it should go to the Army Gymnasium where it usually was. But then I was transferred to the infantry school as a company second in command, where I stayed until 1991. And then, but my specialization was still Coin Urban. And I did quite a number of presentations at the annual infantry conference or congress that they had at the infantry school. And they decided that at that stage, 1991, the unrest in South Africa and specifically in Soweto was completely out of hand. And I was transferred to Group 42 next to Soweto, which was actually the whole of the West Rand, but eventually the only place that I ever worked was in Soweto. That was a very, very interesting period in my life. I saw politics happening, and I saw what was happening during that time. And I saw a lot of the lies that was spread by the politicians at that stage, and the way that the people of Soweto was used and abused to drive certain agendas. Now, just to give you an orientation of Soweto at that time, Soweto had a population, official population at that time, of just over 3 million people. But if you really went out and saw what was happening, you quickly realized it's much more than that. We estimated that there must have been about anywhere between 4 and 5 million people residing in Soweto. Squatter camps were busy growing like crazy. And then the two sides of Soweto that we had was, or the two factions, which was supposed to be the ANC faction and the IFP faction, which was, according to them, was everything was politically motivated, which was not true at that stage. Now, how did things happen in Soweto? How did the IFP members or the Zulus came about to be in Soweto? In the 1930s, 1940s, the country needed mine workers, because up to that stage, you mostly had white workers working in the mines, working on the railways as normal workers. They were the guys at the lowest level. But the economy grew in such a manner during the 1930s, 1940s, that the white people became the office workers, which obviously created a certain vacuum for unschooled workers to come in, and the government at that stage decided to get the guys from the then Zululand to come and work there. And there was hostels built specifically in Soweto and certain other areas as well, but mostly in Soweto, a number of hostels where the Zulu workers, the migrant workers, then stayed and traveled to and forth between the mines and the railway stations, or wherever they worked at that stage. Now, obviously, these guys started, they had, all of their families were still residing in Zululand, KwaZulu-Natal, obviously, as it is known today. They then started marrying women in Soweto or from surrounding areas. And these guys then started families in Soweto as well. So they had a family in Soweto, and they had a family in Zululand, or nowadays the KwaZulu-Natal area. During December, most of the mines closed, most of the businesses closes, and these guys then went back to KwaZulu-Natal, to their families there, leaving their families back in the Gauteng, or the old Transvaal, as it was then known at that stage. So that's how they came to be in the area. Later on, as the politics started growing, and initially, obviously, as we all know, the old UDF, United Democratic Front, was a front party or front organization for the ANC. They drove the ANC's agenda in South Africa, because we all know that the ANC was banned up to February 1990, when they were declared a legal organization by the state president then, at that stage, F.W. de Klerk, and Nelson Mandela and all his leadership, or his whole leadership, then was either freed from prison, or they came back from the various countries where they resided. And they then began mobilizing. Now, we're aware of the history of bombs that were planted. We all know the Church Street bombing. We know about a lot of other bombings, which was planned by the guys in exile, the ANC members in exile, or ANC leadership in exile, and even the leadership that was in jail on Robben Island. Now, after they were all freed from jail, all of them came back from the various countries where they stayed. It was a mass mobilization of these guys and of the population, of which I suppose Soweto, or we definitely experienced Soweto, was the biggest area where they mobilized their forces from. And the politicians mostly started working there. One of the key role players at that stage was Winnie Mandela, as we know it, even before Nelson Mandela was freed from jail, and Chris Hani. They were the two guys, or the two politicians or activists that worked in Soweto the most. And then obviously a number of other smaller figures. Winnie Mandela, I mean, until 1990, she was isolated in her house in Soweto, that small house where herself and Nelson Mandela used to stay. In the late 80s, one of I think it was the Swedish government, if I remember correctly, built the massive house in Orlando West for her, where she stayed, and the house to which Nelson Mandela came back to after he was released from prison. And after they were divorced, he then moved to his house in Sandton. So that's basically a bit of background on what happened there. Now, if you look at Soweto, there's firstly, it's quite a flat area, and there's two trajectories, train or railway trajectories, coming from the southern part of Soweto, and then converging at New Canada Station. That is the final station. Now, there's approximately seven 17 of these stations, 8 on the one trajectory and 9 on the other trajectory. Now, a lot of the fighting between the IFP at that stage and the ANC happened on either the stations or on the trains. There were trains that were totally informally allocated to the IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party members, and then other trains that was allocated to ANC members. And you could be asked at any stage during your travel from town to your station where you would get off to show your ID card. And if a IFP member was found to be on an ANC train, what happened to him was that he would be dropped out of the train at full speed and obviously killed instantly. Or as they passed because there was clearly not marked, but the train drivers very well knew there was ANC stations and there were IFP stations. So an IFP train would never stop at an ANC station and the other way around. The Orlando East station, for instance, was situated just above Nansfield Hostel, which is a IFP hostel. So it wouldn't happen. They would rather go to the Nansfield station than go to get up at the train at the Orlando East station. So that's the way that they would operate. And the IFP has a weird way of working. If one of their members were killed by the ANC in either a drive-by shooting or a bombing incident or any way in which it would happen, they believe 10 to 12 or they believe that 10 to 12 of the ANC members had to die for that. And I specifically remember one morning we divided the stations into 2 parts. On the one side, the police would guard the stations in the mornings between 5 and 8, and in the afternoons between 4 and 7. And the Defence Force would take the other trajectory. Now, the Defence Force had the eastern trajectory of 8 stations, and the South African Police had the trajectories on the western side, and then obviously meeting at each other at New Canada Station. Now, we as the Defence Force had one of the stations on which the most of the drama happened was Orlando East Station. And a few days before a specific incident of which I will be telling you now happened at Orlando East Station, and it's close by the Orlando Stadium, where it's a massive stadium. We all know about the Orlando Stadium. And nowadays, it used to be a stupid little soccer stadium at that stage. There was an incident where a number of Zulus were killed, or IFP members were killed a few days earlier. And then one morning, it was in winter time, I'll never forget it because it was still very dark. So you'd have one security guard posted on the station with a shotgun. And I mean, what is he going to do if something happens there with a shotgun with 8 rounds in it? So the first thing that they would do, if something happens at the station or on the station, he would fire off 1 or 2 shots in the air and then run for his life to get out of it. And the Klipspruit Valley Road leads past the Orlando Station on the east or on the western side, and the entrance to the station is on the eastern side. But the station was dug in quite a distance below most probably about 5 or 6 meters below the road. So we could not enter with vehicles onto the station area. We had to sit from up top and watch what is happening down at the station. And we had a platoon at each of that stations. Now, this specific morning, I was parked there with a platoon of troops at the Orlando East Station. And on the eastern side of the station was an embankment going down into Klipspruit Valley Road. And from there, if you walk or you drive down the Klipspruit Valley Road, the Mansfield Hostel is most probably about 500 meters from there. And the station was quickly filling up at about 5 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, because everybody is going to work. And it's mostly, or it's not mostly, it's ANC members getting up there on the train to go to work. And it was the next moment, there was most probably about 300 people on the station. The next moment, there was about 200, 300 Zulus appearing out of the dark from that embankment with pangas and spears and starting to mangle these people with these ANC members on the station. And obviously, the first thing you heard was the 2 shots of the guard firing off his shotgun in the air, and he would run. And these people didn't have anywhere to go. Now, how do you, with 30 troops, what do you do? It's pitch dark. There's faint light on the station. And you see these people being murdered and mangled by the Zulu impis with their pangas and their spears. And where do you shoot? Who do you shoot? Because it's pitch dark, as I said, and it's black people. You can't distinguish anybody or anything from each other. And the next thing that they would do, this would carry on for about 5 minutes. And it was a bloody mess. It was people lying, bleeding, dying on that station in heaps. And the Zulu impis or Zulu warriors would walk down that embankment, line up in the street below in the Klipspruit Valley Road, and start walking back to Mansfield Hostel. And there was nothing anybody could do at that stage. So that was one of the incidents that I specifically remembered. Now, the politicians, and there's a number of these incidents which we'll get to, the politicians at that stage started saying that everything is politically motivated, because it's the IFP trying to scare the ANC people not to vote for the ANC, which was utter nonsense. This was totally ethnical, and it was ethnical right up to the end in 1994, 95, after the elections as well. There was no politics. These people didn't care about politics. They didn't care about the ANC, and they didn't care about the IFP. It was mostly between the Zulus on the one side and the ANC-orientated Xhosa nation living on the other side, and then a number of Sepedi as well, living in Soweto. That was that. Another incident I remembered was on a Sunday afternoon at the Meadowlands Hostel. Now, Meadowlands is right in the northern part of Soweto with a massive hostel. And the hostel, now the way that it would happen is you would have the road running right from Orlando East up to Meadowlands. On the one side of the road, you'd have the IFP hostel, and on the other side of the road, you would have the ANC-orientated area. Now, at this hostel, they had a soccer field right in front of the hostel, and the children would usually play soccer there, right? It was on the street side. And then the ANC would, from the other side, just either drive past with an AK or whatever type of automatic rifle it would be, and then spray these children with bullets. And they would lay there, a number of them dead or very badly wounded, critically wounded. And then that would spark a terrible revenge from the IFP side. Now, I never knew what these people were thinking. What were they thinking? They know the culture of the Zulu people, or they knew the culture of the Zulu people. They knew that the Zulus would come for revenge. That's it. It's absolutely true. But they still kept on doing it. This type of incidents happened on a daily basis. So this is the one type of thing that happened. But this specific Sunday afternoon, I was home, and they called me at the ops room. There was a bomb that went off somewhere in Meadowlands. I had an informant at Meadowlands Hostel, and just after that he called me and he said, someone, the way that he said it, hurled a bomb, which meant he hurled a bomb into the hostel. I drove up there. He obviously activated one of the companies that I had at the base at that stage to immediately go up there, because we knew what was going to happen. It was going to be a bloodbath. As I arrived there, we realized that this incident happened right in the middle of the hostel where the Indunas usually had their meetings. And what happened, an ANC member gave a little 4-year-old boy a hand grenade, and he told him to hold it in his hand and take it to his dad. But they pulled out the pin of the grenade. And his dad was one of the Indunas. They had this meeting on Sunday afternoon. And as he walked up to his dad, he obviously saw what was this, and he gave it to him. Now, all the men ran away, but this child was so flabbergasted because he didn't know what was happening. And we all know that you have a 3.5-second delay on a hand grenade. And it blew this child to pieces and injured a number of the Indunas, which obviously sparked a whole cascade of revenge again. So this is the type of thing that happened on a daily basis. Winnie Mandela, obviously, as we all know, was behind the necklaces. Necklaces was something we had on a daily basis in Soweto. In the mornings, it usually happened at night. Now, everything happened either after 7 at night, because then everybody came back from work. So it was either after hours, up to about 10, 11 o'clock at night, and then things all of a sudden quietened down. Or it happened on weekends. So, which implies we never had a life. You, during the day, in the mornings, you had to be at the stations at 4 o'clock to go at the stations until 8. Then as a permanent force member and as the staff officer operations, obviously during the day I had meetings scheduled. I still had work to do at the office. And then in the 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you had to be back at the stations again. Now, we had companies from units like one para-battalion, various countries across the country, which was sent to us and which we had for a 6 weeks or a 3 months period, which we could use because we did not have troops of our own, as it was a group HQ. And we all know that the group HQ didn't have their own troops. So we relied on other units all over the country to provide us with troops. I even had a battalion of 3-2 battalion at one stage after they were moved to Pomfret, and they tried to utilize them in the country, in South Africa, which was a very, very strange concept. Because these guys were, number one, they were Portuguese speaking. Okay, they could speak English as well, but they were Portuguese speaking. And it was at that stage, it was a political, or 32 Battalion was a politically very hot situation, or a no-go, persona non grata, or unit non grata, if you can call it that way. Anyway, they sent, and what we initially did was I had observation posts posted everywhere on all the water towers all through Soweto, to obviously to serve as early warning if something would be happening, because it's very high. And then I had a clandestine observation post on one of the mines, which I usually had manned by a reconnaissance group, 2 or 3 guys that went in a very clandestine way. And they had, all of them had night vision. At that stage, the FLIR, forward-looking infrared, just came in. I had a unit on borrow from Eloptro at that stage, which was a brilliant piece of brilliant instrument, but it was really a new thing. I had that, which they could use at night, and then during the day they had these maritime binoculars, massive binoculars, and they were then, all of these lookouts, or the observation posts, had communication with our troops on the ground. So if something happened, they could then talk them into, or on where the incident happened. So that's basically the way that we operated, with a lot of these observation posts and very good radio communication. So, but anyway, so I decided, let's try infiltrating my observation post that I had at the mine, or on the mine, and see if the guys can get onto that. They were detected immediately. It was so immediately my whole observation post, the clandestine observation post, was then compromised, and we couldn't do that. Well, we could not utilize that observation post anymore. They were in the unit. What we usually did, we did a bit of training when they arrived at the unit, all the units that started, or that was transferred to us for utilization. So we did training for about a week, and then they were deployed. First morning, 32 Battalion was deployed. They drove up, the whole of the battalion, to Meadowlands, stopped their vehicles at the soccer field in Meadowlands, and got off their vehicles and deployed in a sort of a formation, just so that they could see. It was typically a display of force. That was all it was. And then from there, they would then start patrols. But it was part of the orientation as well, to drive them through Soweto, to take them to all the hotspots and so forth. Immediately, because they were so well known, and everybody by then knew, because it was all over the media, by then they knew that 32 Battalion was in the area. And the moment that they got off their vehicles, there was a crowd forming across the road from the ANC side of Meadowlands. And they started walking towards them and throwing stones at them, but they were far from them. They didn't really reach them. One of the troops, for some reason, which I don't know up to this stage or to the day, fired a shot into the ground, and it ricocheted, and it basically just caused a flesh wound to a pregnant woman, which was obviously blown up tremendously by the media, by the politicians in Soweto and so forth, with the necessary political pressure, within 24 hours, 32 Battalion was removed from Soweto and sent back to Pomfret at that stage. Now, coming back to the stations, the way that we would do it is the troops would debus and then stand on the stations about 10 meters from each other. Initially, the population was quite scared. They would not approach the troops. They would get off. They would not make trouble on the stations, obviously, because they were scared of the troops. Now, we didn't really have anything but our normal R4 rifles. That was the Defence Forces' only weapon to handle anything. So it was a difficult situation, because what do you do if you were attacked? The only thing that you could do was to use sharp ammunition, and if you did use sharp ammunition, I mean, look at what happened to the one shot that one of 32 Battalion's members shot. So I decided I'm going to try something just as a way to see if I can keep the local population a bit of a distance from the troops when these guys got off the trains, or the population got off the train. So I spoke to the guys at Mechem, and we got about 300 R1, old R1 bayonets that was lying somewhere in a store, and it was converted by Mechem for me to fit onto the R4, because the population would get off the trains and they would then take the troops' rifle by the barrel and shake him around and make fun of him and so forth. And because we had, at some instances, we had black troops as well. So they were really, they said to them they were PW's dogs and all these types of names, and we all know that. So, and Mechem then chromed these bayonets for me. So that was, it looked impressive if you put that onto an R4. And so first day that it was troops, everybody, all troops on the stations had bayonets silver, or these chrome bayonets fitted onto their rifles. And obviously these guys didn't come close to them because they saw this bayonet and it looks sharp, and it just looks generally very, very threatening. It was on for, I think we used this for most probably about 2 days. And once again, we hit the press because we are now, this is a very aggressive way that we are trying to go at the stations. And immediately we had to remove the bayonets again, and we were back to square one again. Now, weapon smuggling was rife at that stage. In the ANC and the IFP brought firearms, illegal firearms, into Soweto and into the country by the hundreds and thousands, most probably, if it's not thousands. And we realized that, and we had to do something. So we had informants everywhere in all the hostels, IFP, as well as places where ANC members or ANC groupings were concentrated. And so we started doing roadblocks and vehicle checkpoints. Now, a vehicle checkpoint is compromised, and a roadblock is compromised very quickly. The moment that you are on your way, they know, the local population know very well, because they had a very good communication system. They knew very well when the Defence Force or the Army vehicles would move in a certain direction. So they'd warn people, the Army is coming here, or the police is coming to a certain area. And we realized we had to do something. So I then developed a specific doctrine using helicopters to deploy vehicle checkpoints and roadblocks all across Soweto, all over Soweto. So, and at that stage, we could still fly. We still had fuel to do these type of things. So the way that I would do it is, firstly, in the planning phase, I would mark maps of the areas where we would deploy a section or sometimes 2 sections of troops in a vehicle checkpoint. So I would pick about 120 different places all over Soweto where we would suspect they would ferry weapons through, or the road that they would use to ferry weapons into Soweto. And then I would mark them, firstly. So I'd give each of those 120 checkpoints, I would give them a number. So it's 1 to 120. Then I would work out a map reference as to where each of these were. And then we would get the F4s in. And I would give each of the pilots, I would hand a map and a list with the map reference of the specific roadblock where the VCP would be, the vehicle checkpoint would be. And then myself, as the commander of that specific operation, would either fly in a Alouette or a Bosbok, which I didn't like too much at that stage, because in a Bosbok, to fly in a Bosbok for 2-3 hours at a time, circling to the one side and then circling to the other side was not such a pleasant experience. So it was not an ideal command and control aircraft, for which an Alouette was much easier to do. So I would then fly in the command and control aircraft, and then I would start the operation. And each of the 3 Oryxes would then load either a section, which is 10 troops, or 2 sections, 20 troops, depending on the size of the road, where they would be deployed, and so forth. And I would then call a random number of any of the 120 places that I had identified before to the various pilots, and they would then fly there with the troops, drop them off, and then go back and ferry another section or 2 sections of troops. And we usually used about a company of troops for that, which is 9 platoons. Sorry, not 9 platoons, 9 sections. And after all 9 sections were deployed, we started with the whole process. The guys that started off in, say for instance, in VCP number 10 would then, or number 1 would then be ferried to VCP position number 10, and number 2 would be to number 12, and so it would carry on. So that's the way that we deployed it. It was quick and it was easy. So the guys saw the helicopter, and they didn't know where the helicopter was going. It just landed. Troops would get off immediately, VCP in place. We had tremendous success with this way of vehicle checkpoints that we tried. I had media as well. A lot of times that the media wanted to see this. They accompanied us to a lot of these. I remember one of the media persons one day, very, very well known, Jessica Pitchford, I can call her name, attended one of these operations. And afterwards, we were severely criticized on the 6 o'clock news because of the lots of money, the amount of money that we wasted. Because we were open about it. We said to them, remember, this is a proactive type of operation. So what we want to do is firstly, keep the guys out of Soweto, not to bring the weapons or the firearms in, the illegal firearms. That's the one thing. And then obviously to catch the guys that would bring it in, because it's very impromptu, it's very quick, and it's a very swift operation. But I mean, you know for yourself that to run a oryx for an hour, and I would run them for 6 hours at a time, 3 oryxes at a time, costs a lot of money. To have the troops deployed costs a lot of money. So there's costs involved, and I would give them the estimated cost of that. And then at the end of the day, we would have a debrief where all the press would usually be as well. And I remember specifically the one day she interviewed me and asked me, so what successes did you have? I said, I think we found 1 firearm, illegal firearm or something like that, a bit of dacha and so forth, but that was that. And I said, that is exactly the success, because these guys could not bring firearms or any illicit drugs into the area. But she played it the other way around. And so we were severely criticized on the 6 o'clock news that night on SABC 1 or 2, I can't even remember which one it was. So that was some of the operations that we tried to do. But anyway, we had a lot of killings. We had killings, murders on a daily basis. And it was mostly, as I said, faction fighting. It was infighting between the Xhosas and the Zulus at that stage. And the ANC government at that stage and the IFP, not the IFP that much, because I believed Dr. Buthelezi to be more of a gentleman than any of the other ANC leaders used to be. But anyway, they tried to make it a political thing, which was not true. With the elections coming up from middle of 93, things really started subsiding. But we had lots of political meetings, literally on a daily basis, that they mobilized the masses by means of the political meetings that they had. We had daily meetings with these politicians at the Protea police station. We had our jock, it was a permanent jock that we had for 3-4 years there, that we had meetings between the army and the police, and then all other role players that wanted to do it or to attend the meetings. And then it became where we had meetings with the political leaders on a daily basis, which was very interesting, but very frustrating as well. And I think at that stage, I was becoming more of a political commissar than anything else. I remember we then at that stage had to meet with the political leaders and the businessmen in Soweto and set up meetings between the black businessmen and the white businessmen in the surrounding areas such as Roodepoort and Randfontein and even Johannesburg. That we had on a Friday, we usually had a sheep on the spit or whatever it might be, and then invite the mayor, say for instance, of Soweto and a number of his councillors and businessmen of Soweto, and then white businessmen from the surrounding areas, and we'd have a braai, and so that they could meet each other. Now, initially, we never knew that these guys' culture is that after they had their food, they would go home immediately. That's the way that they operated. So the first time when we had this type of meeting or this type of party for the guys, we would serve them with food immediately when they arrived at the unit. And immediately after that, they left. So we spoke to someone, or the guys asked them, but what is happening here? Why do you leave? This is rude. This guy still wanted to meet with you, all the businessmen from the various areas. And they said, but this is our culture. So we learned that lesson very quickly. And when they arrived, we would take them to the bar area, and they would have the alcohol would flow. And then after about 3 or 4 hours, then they had their lunch, and then they could go home. So that was more successful. Now, during the early days, if I can go back to that, with business in Soweto was very difficult. The one very prominent businessman that we had in Soweto was a guy called Godfrey Malloy. Godfrey was known as the godfather of Soweto. Everybody knew Godfrey. Godfrey grew up in Soweto. He was raised by a white Catholic priest. And he then started, obviously, if you say a black businessman in Soweto, and in his own words, it was never legal business. And I remember he had a nightclub in Soweto called the Blue Fountain. The Blue Fountain was internationally known. He had all the movie stars coming out from America to visit South Africa, and then obviously visit Soweto. We literally, from 1993, we had tours, guided tours on a daily basis through Soweto, where we used to visit a squatter camp or two, where we would go and show them Winnie Mandela's house, where she stayed, where we would go to Baragwanath Hospital and walk them through it. Because at that stage, Baragwanath Hospital was the largest hospital in the Southern Hemisphere. It had something like 2,900 beds. And it was, and then they had a pediatric ICU, and a neonatal ICU as well, which at any given stage, there would be most probably about 30 or 40 of these little babies lying in that ICU. So, and this was extremely interesting to these people. And then we would usually close off or end off this guided tour through Soweto with a party at Godfrey Malloy's Blue Fountain. Now, as I said, all the international film stars, movie stars, used to visit the Blue Fountain. They wanted to go there, and he had a gallery, Godfrey, in front where, as you entered the Blue Fountain, in the foyer, with photographs of all these movie stars that frequented his Blue Fountain. Godfrey was a very good friend of a number of South African ministers. And I remember some days on a Friday, we would get a call from the government saying that Mr. Botha was coming through to the Blue Fountain. And Mr. Botha would come through, only him and his driver. And we had to have guards there in an unmarked car. So we'd meet him at the, what's the military base, Doornkloof, not Doornkloof, whatever. It was, one of the groups was based there on the Golden Highway. And he wouldn't stop, he would just drive through. They'd give us the registration number of the vehicle that he would drive and the color of vehicle. And it was a Nissan Skyline at that stage that he mostly used, obviously with darkened windows, just him and his driver. And Mr. Botha would then, we'd accompany him to the Blue Fountain, and myself and sometimes the intelligence officer to sit in the Blue Fountain just to see and to monitor that everything would be going right. Now, Godfrey had the most expensive alcohol behind his bar because of the profile of the people that visited him. So they would have a good party, and then they'd usually end up, he was a very good musician as well. He was a good saxophone player. And Godfrey would play the saxophone, and Mr. Botha would take the microphone and sing a few songs for everybody in the restaurant or in the club, and then he would go home late afternoon. Now, Godfrey told us the way that he started his business, very interesting guy. He had an old Bedford truck, these old bubble-nosed Bedford trucks during the 50s and the 60s. And he had shebeens all over Soweto. So that was his business, was shebeens. And he would buy alcohol from various retail outlets all over Johannesburg, stock it, this truck, and then drive to Soweto and go and drop it off at his shebeens. Now, every now and then, obviously, the police detected him and the police knew about him. So they would then stop him and take him to Protea Police Station. At that stage, Protea Police Station was a small police station. Take him to Protea Police Station, confiscated all of his alcohol, and on a warning, then released him and got to just carry on with it. But he said, later on, he got clever. He says the policeman usually drove in front of him, and at every stop street that he stopped, he said to the guys standing next to the road, get into the back of the truck and unload the truck. So they'd usually unload about 4, 5, 6 cases of alcohol. And by the time they got to Protea Police Station and the police wanted to lock him up or confiscate his alcohol, which alcohol? There was nothing left on the truck. So very, very interesting guy. But during the real unrest period, these guys trusted us so much that we would take, he would phone us in the morning, on, say for instance, on a Monday morning, and say to us, can we come and pick up cash from the Blue Fountain and go and bank it at one of the banks, which we would do. We would go in, I'd send in the intelligence officer and 1 or 2 of his troops in an unmarked vehicle. They would pick up 30, 40, 50,000 rands of cash and go and bank it. And I mean, this was in the early 90s. That was a lot of money. And that's the way, or that's how they trusted us. With and I acknowledge that the relationship that we had with the IFP was on a much better level than we had with the ANC side of Soweto. They, for various reasons, I think the leadership had a lot to do with it, because the ANC leadership, everybody that lived in the South Africa during the 91, 92, 93, 94 period knows that the South African Defence Force was vilified by the ANC, whereas the IFP, on the other hand, tried to keep the South African Defence Force in the, at that stage, black areas, such as Soweto, and the ANC wanted the South African Defence Force out of the black areas. So it was, that was a political game as well. And we had to really endure a lot of these type of political games from the ANC side. The type of meetings that we had with the politicians, and it was usually held at the Protea Police Station at the Jock, was usually, if we initially tried getting the OFP and the ANC guys together in the same room, but it was a miserable failure because it was once or twice, and they literally start fighting amongst each other and screaming and shouting and literally promising to murder each other. So that was chaos, and it didn't work. And we were obviously, the ANC said that we stood only for the IFP. But as I say, the IFP was the only people who tolerated the South African National Defence Force at that stage. Coming back to the role that Winnie Mandela played in Soweto, sometimes I felt sorry for her because she fielded everything on behalf of the ANC. She fielded everything, all the troubles that she had on behalf of the ANC. And she was literally pushed out by them after they came into power after 1994. They only tolerated her because she was married to the president, but that marriage didn't last very long after he was released from Robben Island. So she was really pushed aside. And we're all aware of what happened with the necklaces, the way that she advocated for necklacing, the whole Stompie Sepay saga, which everybody knew that she killed Stompie or had Stompie killed. There was a lot of things that she did on behalf of the ANC and for the so-called cause of the ANC. I had a number of run-ins with her as well, and she was really not a very pleasant person. One day they had a march from Dobsonville to somewhere in Soweto. I can't even remember where it was, but it's a walk of about 20 kilometers. But they implicitly said that they want to walk, they want to do this march through IFP area as well, which they knew would cause problems. But she and Chris Hani insisted on doing it. So they did it, and obviously we had to protect them as the Defence Force and as the police. There's most probably about 4,000 or 5,000 of them marching through from Dobsonville to the stadium where they would be going, to Orlando Stadium. Yeah, that's right. That's where they went. And as they walked through Jabavu White City, now on the one side of the road, it's a double carriageway, not double carriage, double road. On the one side, you had houses. So they were completely boxed in on the one side with houses. On the other side, there was the railway line. And with a very high fence, screening the railway line off from the houses for safety's sake, obviously. So as they walked through there, the guys started throwing stones at them, and they could go nowhere. And then they started shooting at them with AK-47s, and they started throwing hand grenades as well, it caused chaos. That nobody was killed that day or seriously injured is really, it's a miracle. But I remember them on the ground trying to get through on the fences or be underneath the fence onto the railway line, because that was their only escape route. They couldn't go back to where they were coming from because you had this crowd of 5,000 people, and they couldn't go forward because the IFP started lining up in front of them, literally confronting them. So it was chaos, and we then had to intervene at that stage, which we did not want to do. you never wanted to do that because it could cause a massive incident. Yeah, that was about that. After things just started subsiding after middle of 1993 and not much happening. Myself, at that stage, had to be then promoted, and they wanted to transfer an ex-APLA colonel, lieutenant colonel type in to take over my position. The promise was that I would be promoted as well, onto the same level as you would be promoted. But we were all physically or basically stripped of any power that you had, because everything that you did had to be co-signed, had to be co-decided. He would have been a shadow for me. You would have shadowed me, which was literally not the case, because if he said, no, we're not going to do something this way, or we would not be executing our operation, that was it. I couldn't argue with him. He decided. And so at the end of 94, I was transferred away or out of Soweto to Army headquarters with promotion. But I resigned because I would have gone as the SO1 training, would have to chief to the Army headquarters at Director of Infantry. But as I arrived there, they sent me to Walmanstal to do the selection of the non-statutory forces, the old APLA, MK, and so forth, from all the senior officers, from major to brigadier. So they would come in, they'd write an exam on the level that he claimed to be. So for instance, the guy came in as a full, he said he's a full colonel. He would write a colonel's exam, which was quite simple, normal military questions. And most of them, 90% of them, would fail miserably, with 3%, 4%. And then you would ask him, so which questionnaire would you like to write now? And then they'd usually go down to a major, and eventually end up, say for instance, as a sergeant or as a corporal. Some of them ended up as captains. But what was mostly frustrating, we used to have 2 selection boards on a daily basis. The one at 10 o'clock in the morning and the other one at 3 o'clock in the morning, or in the afternoon. So after this guy wrote the exams and did pass or did not pass, he would then go to the selection board with a recommendation from us, stating this guy, we recommend that he be appointed as a sergeant or as a captain or as a major, whatever it might be. And that would happen then. And then he would be admitted, and then he would carry on to go through the whole of the selection criteria to be admitted into the Defence Force. But the most frustrating part was, at that stage, General George Myron was the chief of the army, and the chief of MK was his shadow as well. So you'd get a letter from chief of the South African Defence Force saying that Mr. So-and-so, who accompanies this letter or has this letter in his hand, will be appointed as a colonel or as whatever it might be. He'd still go through the selection criteria and go to the selection board, write the exam, and usually not pass the exam. In maybe, as a colonel, most probably not even passing a sergeant's exam, but he had to be appointed as a colonel. So you'd send everything through to the selection board, and he would walk out as a colonel. That was the most frustrating part. I said, this is it. I'm really not up to it. And I resigned, and obviously had to forfeit the promotion that would be coming my way, which I was going out anyway. So I then left the South African Defence Force in January of 1995. I never regret one moment of my period in the South African Defence Force. I had a good time. I had a lot of stints in the operational area in Southwest then at that stage, up in Angola, taking part in other operations and so forth. It was. I think I'm an adrenaline-driven person. I love the adrenaline of anything interesting. I'm not a person that likes routine. I'm not the type of person that can go into an office every morning at 7 o'clock or at 8 o'clock to do exactly the same job that I did yesterday and the weeks before, and will be doing it for the next 30 years or so. It's not the type of person I am. I loved it. It was good, but I think I left at absolutely the right time. It would have frustrated me to death, the type of person that I am, to have stayed on in the South African Defence Force. It was really a very good time. I did not, as most of the guys during our time period, either with the Southwest African or the deployment in South Africa, as well as my time at a training unit or in Soweto, did not have much time with our families. I was more shot at in Soweto than I was ever shot at in any of my deployments on the border. I had an incident one morning with a hand grenade where a guy was shot at his house up in Netherlands. I arrived there. I had a Casper that I had, Command Casper, and I arrived on the scene the same time as one of the SABC's journalists arrived. We stopped about, probably about 50 meters from the house where the guy was killed. It was quite a prominent ANC member that was killed. I got out through the hatch on top and jumped off onto the butt flap of the Casper. The journalist was parked across the road from me at one of these little white box shaped BMWs. It was a 320, I think, one of these 1988, 89 model. We all know them. The roads were very narrow. This guy was most probably parked from me, from my Casper, where the side of my Casper was probably about 4 or 5 meters. And he reached into his BMW to the back seat. He had the door open, reached onto the back seat to take out his camera. I was standing on the mud flap of the Casper, and the next moment, someone threw a hand grenade right in the middle of the road between us. It exploded. I didn't have time to go anywhere. He didn't have any time to go anywhere because he didn't even see it coming. I saw it coming. I saw it dropping, and there was absolutely nowhere for me to go. And it exploded. He got shrapnel in the back of his legs and his buttocks. I didn't get not even one piece of shrapnel from where I was standing, and I was literally about 2 meters from from the hand grenade where it exploded. So this type of incidents, we were shot at regularly, literally on a daily basis, specifically at night. You would see the AK rounds with the traces flying across you or at you or past you, which I don't think many of the guys deployed in the old operational area on the border in Southwest Africa or nowadays Namibia were even shot at, even saw a terrorist. The big difference was we didn't know who the enemy was. You were amongst the people. The enemy was right around you. It could be the guy standing next to you, maybe pulling a pistol on you or shooting at you. It could be the guy that was that you had a daily meeting with, maybe. That's what made it so difficult. I think politics, the politics brought into the South African Defence Force made it intolerable. It made it very difficult. We had to play politics as well. There was no enemy anymore because it was literally said to us, you don't have an enemy anymore. There's no such thing as an enemy. You have to play politics, but you still have to remain unbiased, although you are severely affected by the politics, which made it so difficult. It was, I think, still today, if we look back now, if I can look back at what is happening in this country at this stage and look back at 1994, it's worse now. It's much, much worse. The political unrest is much worse. There's political marches for some reason on a daily basis across the country. The economy in South Africa is in tatters due to little or no control from the South African government. They don't have any control over anything because they've created their own monster by allowing the trade unions to be part of their alliance. And they can't do anything about it anymore because the moment that they alienate the trade unions, the moment that they alienate the South African Communist Party from them, there's nothing of the ANC left. And they'll be voted out of the seat that they currently have. And they don't want that. Eskom, what is happening with Eskom, with the South African Airways, this is history. And it's not going to improve, except if something really happens that nobody expects to happen. But at this stage, I cannot see that anything can improve what is happening or the state that the country is currently in. I think that's about any questions that you would like to ask me, Fosi.
Thomas, we covered quite a lot of ground there. I started jotting down things. Well, from the beginning where you mentioned you went for 2 years theology and then to the army. That was quite a Damascus Road moment there, somewhere along the road, if I might call it that much. Wat het jou laat eerstens gaan predikant wil studeer and then you decided, no, this is not for me, and off you went and joined the army. And then rolled up in that, you mentioned your dad that was in the military, and you mentioned your dad said infantry. Was your dad also infantry?
He was an infantryman, but then he switched to the South African Medical Corps. At that, when he switched to the Medical Corps, it was still the medical corps, and then obviously changed to the South African Medical Services, the old SAMS as we knew it then at that stage.
You mentioned adrenaline fueled. You've mentioned various amounts of training along the way as well. So specifically your urban coin ops. It almost sounds to me as though in Soweto during that very difficult period of time, you were almost having to reinvent the wheel almost on a daily basis. You had to think out of the box, think laterally, call it what you want to, almost on a daily basis. You get to jump on the so-called enemy, and then the politicians interfere and you've got to try a new strategy. Am I sort of correct in my take there?
Yeah, you're very correct. It's absolutely the way that it happened. It was literally on a daily basis that this happened, and you had to try everything because I think the coin urban doctrine at that stage was not really written or developed for what was happening in South Africa at that time. We were just really starting to develop doctrine. We had guys like Dave Peddle that came from Northern Ireland, a South African, that started developing doctrine, but it was really a thing of trying and see if it works. And then obviously, one of the biggest things, the biggest problems that we had was the legal issues with regards to that. For instance, we had sharp ammunition. We were not allowed to use sharp ammunition. You can't use sharp ammunition on a crowd that was starting to form. You had to get the police in. But the police did not have the numbers. We had the numbers. So you were running the ops, or you were executing the ops, and the police had to assist you with that. That was the biggest issue. And then the legal issues surrounding everything. And the interesting thing, the law in South Africa with regards to the way that the Defence Force is allowed to operate in a coin urban situation hasn't changed. It's still exactly the same as it was in the 1950s and the 1960s and the 1970s. So that was never adapted. The doctrines and the legal aspects with regards to that just doesn't gel. It doesn't get together. It doesn't work, which made it extremely difficult to do, because you tried one thing and then you would be stopped by the politicians. And you try another thing and you'd be stopped by the politicians. And the other thing is we had extremely bad press at that stage. I was one of the guys that was allowed to make my own press statements, whereas normally any Defence Force member had to speak to his local or his, we had at the various commands, we had a media guy that would sit there, and everything he would be the only guy allowed to make media statements. I was allowed to make media statements because of the intensity of what was happening in Soweto, because of the eyes of the whole world that was on Soweto, and the fact that you can't stand there and something happens, an incident occurs, and you say to the media, sorry, I cannot make a media statement. I'm not allowed to make a media statement. That looks extremely bad. So that was all these types of issues that we had could not, that made it so difficult.
And you've just touched on something there. You were policemen, but you weren't allowed to be policemen. You were upholding the law, but as you said, with sharp point ammunition, you weren't allowed to uphold the law that way. So when you showed force, they went at you that way. You couldn't flash your bayonets. So
Yeah.
you were really frustrating, very, very frustrating role carried out with superb diplomacy and aplomb, which leads me to just one or two things about the training. You briefly mentioned you give them about a week's training, the different guys that would come in. Most of these guys had probably never had urban coin ops training in the first place. And then tied in with that, 6 weeks to 3 months there as a bush tour or as a deployment, what sort of impact that kind of situation have on the minds of the people, of your guys? Did you see an increase in psychological problems and issues, or did that manifest only when the guys went away?
I think they had the same frustrations as I had. At one stage, I had the policy of, if a crowd starts forming, I would, instead of engaging them, I would say to the troops, just get away, move away 2 or 3 street blocks away, where you can have them visual, but that they can't reach you. It's like if you are playing tennis and you decide, I don't feel like playing tennis anymore, and you walk off the court, the other guy can't play because he can't play against himself. So later on, I had that type of, whereas we used to engage the crowds with the police. We had water cannons. We'd throw gas at them. All these types of things, rubber bullets, to be able to disperse them. But I realized at one stage, but firstly, the presence of the police, the presence of the Defence Force in a specific area gets these people, or crowds form because of that. So if you decide you're going away or you leave, and after a while you see them, if you watch them, you'll see they start losing interest and they leave. But with regards to the officers that we had, we had young guys, young lieutenants, young captains, young majors coming in, recently exposed to the old bush war, the permanent force guys, which was completely and totally another type of ball game. Now they are exposed to urban coin warfare, which is totally different. It's the other side of the coin, and they were extremely frustrated. We really had especially we had a lot of citizen force companies coming in as well. The guys doing their 3 months camps or 6 weeks, whatever it might be, which were older guys, more mature type of guys. I think they fitted in much better because they had already been used to being a part of the civilian living, and this was not as strange to them. But the young troops that we had at that stage they did not understand the politics and where the politics came from. So we had various guys coming in the same platoon, for instance, and one guy sympathizing maybe with the cause of the ANC. another guy not sympathizing. So they did not know the background of the whole situation. Trauma, they must have been traumatized. It was because at that stage, there was not really such a thing as a trauma counselor. We didn't really believe in if you see a guy being necklaced, having to pick up a body that was murdered last night. So what? It's a dead guy and so forth. Only later on in my life, I realized that there must have been a lot of trauma with these guys. There must have been, if I had to look back at my own behavior, I must have had some trauma. But I think if you have a very good support system at home and around you, in your family, you can definitely overcome this. If you are able to speak about it, to tell someone, listen, I had this experience, to get it out of you, not for this thing not to get into your mind and being able to tunnel through your mind, because that's typically what happens when somebody is traumatized. It starts forming little, what were the foxholes almost, and it creates triggers in different areas of your brain. And when you least expect it, it's triggered, or trauma is triggered, or a specific behavior, system of behavior is created. That's the way trauma works. And if I look back to it today, I realized I must have been traumatized in a lesser way, but I had a very good support system on which I could fall back. After I left the Defence Force, I went and I studied to become a paramedic. And I was in that field for a very long time. So I literally had and the things I saw there was just as bad or even maybe worse in many instances. And if it hadn't been for the brilliant support system that I had, I would have been down another road, most probably. So yes, I think there's a lot of guys walking around today with unresolved issues, because all of us handles trauma in a different manner. And the most dangerous one, or the most dangerous person, is the guy who doesn't talk about it, who does not have a proper support system. So I think we have people walking between us today that's been exposed to this type of traumas, that cannot cope with it and cannot cope with life today.
Well, you touched on it. Instantly, my mind went back there to something that Esvia Fourie said while he was at university after he left the Special Forces, and that ties in perfectly with what you've said. Their psychological course at university, they had as a group thesis. And two of the things with PTSD that came out, key with coping was your family support system, as you've mentioned there. Key. The second one was your level of education that have a bearing there, because it obviously prepares your mind somehow. But then the other thing that you mentioned there, which fits right in here with what Legacy Conversations is doing, is talk, people, talk, speak. Don't carry it, don't internalize it, speak, as you said there. So you've lived a whole life of adventure, because as you said, adrenaline based, and you couldn't have left to more adrenaline, as you yourself said. In paramedic world, they see worse, they see on a daily basis. Once again, you carried on with that, and it took you a while to realize, which is key. You sitting here this evening and we're having a conversation. It's therapeutic to talk, and I'm so glad that you've helped me through my first session here. so easily to sit and listen to you speak. Dis fantasties, baie dankie, and you've brought the crux of the matter to the fore. It's your support group, your support structure that you need. I'm going to drag one slight thing in here. A support structure usually involves faith as well. And yes, Legacy Conversations is relatively strong on that as well. And help, there's Legacy Conversations offers help. There's 2 or 3 psychologists on here that are in the Legacy Partners playlist, offer help to folk, ex-servicemen, ex-police, anything from that era and later even. I think we've been going for quite long. If you want to come back for more chats about that part of your career, feel free. I think I'm gonna ask you if you have got anything more to say here to us this evening to re-emphasize your message. It's fantastic. Thank you very much for this, and I'll leave it over to you. And then when you feel enough's enough, just tell me so, and then we can say thanks to all our watchers and our viewers and our listeners.
Yeah, thank you, Fosi. I'd like to end off, and I always say it. I've had 14 years in the Defence Force, and as I said in the beginning, I never regret one moment of it. It was an absolute honor serving my country, and I don't care what anybody today has to say about whether the war in Angola and the war in Namibia or in Southwest Africa was not worth it. I think it was worth it. It was, this country would have been, I think, down the drain much longer ago, or much earlier than it is today. The fact that we had the Defence Force involved in COIN urban operations for such a long time, or such a long period, is the fact that, or that is why we had a stable country at that stage. If you look today at what is happening, the fact that we don't have a strong Defence Force, the fact that we don't have a strong and proper police service, is why we are in the state, or why the country is in the state it is in today. So I will never regret it. I will always say that every minute was worth it. Every life that was lost was worth it. It's just, we did it for our country at that stage, and we kept this country standing for a very long time. So I'll never regret it, and I never regret any moment of it.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I believe I tie in with what you're saying there. Every life lost, every moment. I think of the countless lives you guys must have saved and helped save by the presence of being there. Otherwise, it would have been bloodbath after bloodbath. So yes, I think the country, if it sits back and takes a good internal hard look at itself, it might turn around and say thank you to you guys for what you did, like we are saying thank you. So I'm going to say to you, sir, thank you very, very much for this. And as it always goes, I'm going to put up the email address here. Any of you with a story, you want to come and share your stories with us, please do. The email address will roll below here. And that's all for me to do then, as to say, until we meet again, God bless.